Hey, everybody, and welcome. Today, I'm excited to be greeted with Dominic, and we're going to talk about all things Strapi, Next.js, and Nodum. Excited to have them here. And before we start, let's have Dominic give us a quick introduction of what you do and what Nodum does.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Dominic from Noton Technologies. I am the tech lead of the Falco squad in Noton. And yeah, so basically, Noton is a digital agency. We are based in Brno, Czech Republic, the home of many tech companies. And we are generally focused on implementation of web-based applications, also some mobile applications for our clients. And we've been happy to work with Strapi for 5 and more years. And that's also why we implemented Strapi and Next.js starter template that we've been using on our project. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, I think that'll be really awesome. And I know you've been Strapi partners forever or a long time now. When did you start and how did you discover Strapi?
Yeah, I think like the first introduction was maybe around 2019 or maybe 2018 when we were discussing about the CMS we could be using as a company. Strapi came up as a name. There has been a back and forth across multiple people in the company. And once we concluded, Strapi was the winner. It was the easiest to apply for the wide scale of projects that we needed. And it was the easiest for us to be able to implement custom features and also the simplicity. So like if you don't have a complex website, you can just use it out of the box.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. I also know that you've created some awesome plugins. Can you briefly mention some of the plugins that your team created?
We've had multiple plugins, but I think some of the most well-known could be the Strapi location plugin, which enables you to select location based on a map or also like filter based on how near you are to something. We've also had the plugin for record locking so that if there are multiple people working on the same thing, your progress of the changes would not get lost along the way. And we also have some more in the pipeline. So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you showcased like one of the most important and coolest features around Strapi is that you can create and add custom functionality through plugin. I think it's amazing that you created the record locking because that's something we didn't do out of the box naturally. And so it's amazing that you could just build a plugin that solves a very important feature, which is like having two users try to edit same content at the same time and accidentally not overwrite someone's changes. I think that's pretty awesome. I know that you're very involved in your community, and so you do meetups often. Can you tell us about like the meetups and why you thought that was a cool thing to do?
Yeah, I think generally it's a good thing to keep the community alive. And we know that there are many people using Strapi, but maybe they don't know that there may be a local community where they could meet, share like the things that they've learned, or maybe learn something new. So we've had a launch party for V5. We've had a meetup last, I think it was in November. So yeah, it's just generally great to meet with people, listen to what was great about Strapi, what was bad about Strapi. Also great to hear from you. So we can always get someone from Strapi involved, which is also really cool. You maybe don't get that with many companies. So yeah, I think it's just great thing to learn and meet people.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you do it like in person. And I think now that a lot of people, work in different places, like it's kind of cool to come together in one place and talk about all cool things that people enjoy. And as an agency, I know you work with a lot of clients. And I guess when starting out, building projects from the start to finish takes some time. And I think that's the reason why you decided to create the Next.js and Strapi template because I'm assuming helped you to solve some of the pain points that you were having. So can you share the experience before creating the template and why it was necessary for your team to create one?
Yeah, just as you were saying. So anytime we had a new client, we needed to take the old project, maybe remove some of the things that we didn't need, such as the components and so on, and we would need to implement the new ones. But this had an issue once we hit a certain point where we had too many new clients and maybe it was not so easy. So there were only a few people within the company who could do that, who could start the base for the new projects. And it was just time consuming and messy. So what we were like, it's not a novel idea, right? To create a starter template. But it was not that we wanted to create a starter template. It was more like a need that we felt and it helped us so much. So it didn't like come overnight. It took multiple months before we were able to compose all of the knowledge that we've learned and composed it into a single package with all the technologies and the packages that we were using on multiple projects. So it was definitely a long time coming, and we've been trying to update it with all of the knowledge we've been learning over the years. So anytime we finish a project or also mid project sometimes, when there is something important, we always try to basically backport it into the template. So it's been saving us a lot of time during the beginning of the project, which is also important for the clients, maybe saving them some money. And generally, we are saying that we've been saving maybe 3 or 4 weeks of the development time since we had the template.
Yeah, that's amazing. I talked to some developers who have these ideas like, I'm going to build this, I'm going to build that. And a lot of times they'll say, I'm going to build everything from scratch, or I'm going to use this service. At the end of the day, I think for a client, it's finding a good balance between, you know, getting stuff delivered fast and also at a good, reasonable price. And I think also recreating a lot of things from scratch. I mean, this is the reason why I love Strapi. I don't have to worry about maintaining Strapi. Strapi team gets to maintain Strapi. And I think combining and creating these reusable projects or starters allow you not only to move fast and probably take on more clients, because with your team size, you could just turn over and produce more projects, but also you're starting from a consistent template where you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. I think that's pretty cool and awesome. And I wanted to ask actually, what made you decide to go with Next.js for the front end? I know we talked about like why Strapi, but why Next.js specifically? And how was your experience has been?
I would say that Next.js has been the most consistent for us over the years. Definitely, we've been trying multiple technologies. We've also had a team especially focused on Vue.js, but generally, most people in the market are focused on React applications. And with React, with the wide scope of projects that we have had, some may be like statically generated, some may be dynamic. We may also have like admin dashboards and so on. So it was basically like the jack of all trades, and it's also been great for us in terms of like being able to adapt the whole company to Next.js, learn people how to use it correctly. So it's been just great. It definitely has some shortcomings. We've been tearing our hair out over some of the decisions, but generally I would say it was really great. We didn't have any specific issues which would prevent us from being able to release the project. So yeah, it was overall really great, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think like things to consider, people who may have not maybe built many projects, but thinking about the trade-offs of different tech stack you use, either Next.js, Strapi, or something else. And I think there is no like perfect solution, but there's best solution for your needs. And I think that's something that people have to take into account and think about. Before we talk a little bit more about this template, there are probably going to be different types of folks that watch this. Maybe there's seniors who are building like small websites, but then there's people that are like, oh, maybe this is not going to work for like a bigger project or whatever. Like from your experience, what's some of the type of projects you built for, and in terms of like the users or the need that it supports? Like for instance, like I'm assuming you're working not like sole entrepreneurial one owner companies, but you're probably working with some bigger companies that have some more like enterprise or bigger needs.
Yeah. So this template was perfect for, I would say, most of the like types of clients that you were mentioning. So we've been working with startups such as Localize. The website is also running on the template, but we've also been working with bigger clients in the enterprise realm, and we've been able to adjust the template for their needs. So this is also something which has been enabled by Strapi and Next.js, is that we can select the configuration. It's not very specific, or maybe it is specific out of the box, but you can adjust these technologies so that they work for you. So I may not be able to mention specific names, but we've also been able to implement websites for enterprises with billions in revenue and billions of visitors. So it's been really great so far.
Yeah, and that's amazing because sometimes people think of like they think about like Strapi. It's like, oh, you could start in 5 minutes. Maybe someone who's like new to it, not realizing that you could customize it pretty far with like plugins, custom code. And a lot of times, some people might not think it's like, hey, it's not just good for beginners to get started, but it could literally fulfill a need for enterprise clients. And then, of course, using Next.js, I think hate it or love it, I think Next.js, there's a lot of things that they do right. And the fact that it is a perfect fit and match with which you could build pretty much like 90% of the needs that you might have from a client. And so with that being said, I'm going to bring up like the template where people could learn more about it on the screen and the repo. But while I do this, can you talk about some of the architectural like decisions in terms of like why you decided to make a monorepo and some of the, reasons of why you chose to do certain things?
Yep, sure. So the reason why we chose a monorepo is that we wanted an improved developer experience. And maybe one of the shortcomings of Strapi is that you are not getting the types from the API. And this is something you can get up and running if you have a monorepo, because you can reuse the auto-generated types from Strapi. And this is something that we've done, which helped us make this template fully type safe, so that even if you make any changes to the schema, they are going to be automatically propagated to the front-end application, which is something that was bugging us because we were running into some runtime issues before the time that we've had the template. But this is one of the reasons why we chose Monorepo to do this. It's based on Turbo, so we can also reuse some packages. So for example, if we have some configuration variables, we can have a separate package, which we can reuse in Strapi and also in the front-end application, so that you only have a single source of truth and you don't need to worry about updating all of the places where it may be used. So that's from like the architectural standpoint. And then we also build these out in Docker, so we can release on any platform really which supports images. And we've been also using it with like services such as Heroku. So if you don't want Docker, you don't need to deal with it. It also works in other hosting providers. Yeah. Then for the template itself, one of the main points that we've been focusing on is the page builder experience and the simplicity of developing pages, as from the developer experience and also from the user experience. So this is where V5 features such as Strapi Preview and content history helped us massively, because these were one of the pain points which we have had with V4. It was that you couldn't see what you were adjusting. And that was one of the pain points with like agnostic CMS such as Strapi, which we were able to fix with the coming of V5.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I do like your decision to make it monorepo to allow full typing, because I think there's no current simple workaround with that. It's something that Strapi is thinking about with our Strapi Client SDK, but not something that we have done. And so I think like having an example for folks to see how one can set up a project that shares the types, I think this is very important. So I'm actually kind of glad that you did that. And I'm curious, like, and I want to share this with the community as one way, for folks to kind of be like, hey, this problem could be solved this way. And what was the like a mechanism of like how you're sharing the types? Like in the old days, like I was just like copy the same types. I didn't have a monorepo, but I would copy the types from my Strapi project into my Next.js project. But how are you doing it in your case?
So maybe it's not as laborious, but I would say it's very similar. So the auto-generated types are basically a folder which is being exposed to the entire monorepo, so you can import it from any package. And that's where we have custom wrappers, or basically we've reused the wrappers from the core Strapi code so that we can use the auto-generated types on the front end. So we also have things such as the API response wrapper and so on, so that it's not just like the specific types from the components or the content types. And yeah, you can generally import this from any package. And it may not be the best solution right now because it's been causing us some issues with the build size image. So doing it this way, importing it directly from Strapi, means that, for example, if we import it from the front-end application, we also need to build the backend application because it's a turbo dependency now. So this is also one improvement that we've been trying to improve in the latest version, and we believe we have solved it, because right now we are doing it in a separate package which is not dependent on Strapi. So the build sizes should be much lower now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And this is one thing like I wanted to mention, like for anybody watching, it's why sometimes using a template or a starter makes sense is because you have a team of folks that using in production to build client apps. And so they went through a lot of these hurdles and issues that they hit along the way. And it's not like they just made, like for instance, I'll give you an example. I made a template. I'm a YouTuber. I made a template for Next.js and Strapi. I'm like, look how cool it is. And people are like, it's amazing. But I have 0 production apps running on that template. So I actually don't know what are some of the shortcomings or problems that people might hit in production. But something like Nodum, like you guys, building a lot of basically, this is your bread and butter, building websites for clients. It's like all the lessons learned. And like you mentioned, all the new lessons you're going to learn, you're going to go and improve and put your learnings in this template. So I think that is pretty awesome. So anybody that's starting out, and maybe even if you wanna like not use a template and start from scratch, it's like use their starter as a guiding star and as an example of best practices. And I love the fact that you migrated to Next.js 16 because everybody, in the Twitter space loves the greatest, latest, code bases, not even thinking like, hey, it's only been out for this long. Maybe we should wait, but whatever, that's a whole topic. But I like the fact that you went through the migration process. So anybody wants to try the project, I will make sure to add the description to this YouTube video that you'll be able to see. And it's pretty straightforward to get started. They have an amazing video that walks you through the process and the steps. I just recently went through the process and installed. All I had to do was clone the repo. After you clone the repo, I switched to use Node. And then you want to make sure that you're using PNPM. And maybe we could talk about it why in a little bit. But I ran PNPM install, which led me to set up the project, all the dependencies. You should have Docker running on your computer because it is using Docker. And then I was able to start Strapi running PNPM run devs Strapi, which basically started my backend. And the only thing I had to do is going into my API tokens and create a token. I just called mine test because I'm not really original. Once you generate the token, you would be able to copy that token and add it inside your, not Strapi, but inside your Next.js project in .env.local. Very important that you're adding it into Strapi REST read-only API key token. And once I've done that, I was able to start my Next.js project and working. The only thing I had to do was I needed to add some content. So because I just did it before the stream very quickly, because I wanted to test it like in real time, how easily can you set up this template? So I just added a home link right here in the nav bar. I also added a title in the footer in the section here. And then I just created a very simple page, hello world. And this literally took me, not exaggerating, 5 minutes to get started with this template, even making mistakes in the process. And then yes, I don't have a lot of content, but you could see that you have our top navigation be generated. You have your footer, exactly the content types that I did. And then you see my page, hello world. And the reason why this kind of page is empty is because it's up for you to decide what project that you're building, but at least all the infrastructure and everything you need is already set up for you. And then maybe while I have this here, we could talk through the folder setup briefly. But before we do that, I do want to kind of backtrack and ask, you build a monorepo. Why did you have to use PNPM instead of anything else?
Yeah, we've been using Yarn for the longest time, I would say, and it was Yarn v1 because that's what everyone was used to. But recently, with the income of Next.js 16 and they also updated to React 19, it made us need to switch to PNPM because in Yarn and I suppose it may be specific to v1, but you cannot have multiple versions or major versions of the same package. So since Strapi is using React 18 and we wanted to use React 19 in the UI application, it was giving us a lot of headaches. So that's why we opted to use PNPM. And previously we didn't want to use PNPM when we were initially starting, but with the arrival of V5, it's now also supported, or maybe it was a little bit before that, but I know that Strapi was having some issues with PNPM, but now it's working great. So we've been able to take down the build image size. We've also been able to use PNPM, which is a lot easier on the folks' machines. So yeah, a lot of updates coming the templates way.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And just talk about again the decision to do a monorepo. I think like you folks are flexible. For instance, you could have a separate Strapi project. You can have a separate front-end project. They could both live in different repos in different places. The thing that you miss out is you're not gonna have an easier time doing type safety like you can in Monorepo. And so, like, when you were creating this project, were you thinking like, were you from the start like we need to make a Monorepo, or there was like a process of deciding that, like, versus pros and cons?
That was definitely a process, and I also mentioned it briefly when talking about how it came to be. So initially, it was just basically a repository with multiple applications in itself. And as I was saying, we were deploying mostly to Heroku, so it wasn't much of an issue. We were just using the build packs for Heroku. But as the time went on, we needed to basically improve the type safety, and also we needed to be able to support more deployment strategies. So the Docker came as a need from multiple clients, and it was just basically the thing that worked for us. I think it was like the first thing that we've tried, and we've been very happy with it.
And very like question that I don't know the answer to, because I always build my projects separately. So I don't have any Monorepo projects set up. But if someone wanted to deploy them separately, is that a possibility?
Yeah, so you can deploy the applications based on how the dependency tree is structured. So, for example, Strapi can be deployed separately, basically with the only inclusion of the shared data package, which we have. So, that's the configuration package that I was mentioning. And it may be worthwhile to mention that we have two workspaces. So, one is the apps, which is where the Strapi and the UI applications live. And we also have the packages, which is where we have some shared ESLint config, the shared data package, and so on. So it will really depend on the dependency tree which you have. So for example, the Strapi application is only dependent on the shared data package. But as I was mentioning, the front-end application was dependent on Strapi, which meant that when you are building the front-end application, you also needed to build the Strapi application because it's a dependency in the turbo repo, but it doesn't necessarily get deployed. It was only being built for you to be able to use the type safety. But then once it's built, it will have some dependencies from Strapi, but you can deploy that image separately. And it also works in Docker, and it also works in other services such as Heroku.
Nice. And I know you're talking about like the deployment and you have Next.js. A lot of people, they typically just want to deploy Next.js to Vercel. And is that something, that I'm assuming, yes, they'll still be able to do, but you decided to go other routes? How has been your experience deploying Next.js to other platforms? Have you had any limitations or issues?
I would say that for the most part, we've been deploying to services which are being used by the enterprise clients. So maybe one of the most recent that I can think of is Azure. We've been using it pretty extensively on multiple projects now. And also some of the applications we've been building were built statically. So we were able to utilize things such as AWS S3 to host these files. But generally saying, we didn't have many of the issues. I know that the internet was very loud about the impracticality of deploying Next.js anywhere other than Vercel. And I need to stand by Vercel. We didn't have many of the issues which were being mentioned. And as for being able to deploy on Vercel, yes, you would be able to do that. But I think there may be some issues with the type safety and you would need to do a separate configuration. I don't suppose it would work out of the box, but most of the clients that we've been working it were not using even before that. So generally, our experience has been quite stellar with these enterprise ready hosting platforms.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider. Like a lot of times I talk to people who like, I build a website, I just deploy to Vercel. I don't need to do all this other stuff. And it's like, bro, like you build a small project, you not with enterprise like in mind. And I think this is like amazing to see that you've built this starter to support like larger enterprise use cases and using more traditional like deployment methods that enterprise companies are used to. So I think that is the power of, having, again, lessons learned based on your starter, and also like showing like, hey, this is a scalable project that could work for mom and pops like restaurant business or to more enterprise rich company that is going to get a lot of users. I think that's something a lot of like people don't consider. It's like, how do you build a project that's going to scale with you as the business scale? And it's cool to see that you kind of took into consideration. And what I want to do is just like for users is to kind of go over through like the project in terms of kind of like the folder structure and kind of like how it's organized to kind of give folks an idea of how everything is structured. So I have this open on my screen. And if you want to kind of talk through something that you think is going to be helpful for users that are starting with this template.
So this is basically the most bare bones configuration of the template. So it has two applications in it. It's Strapi and UI, and they are located in the apps folder. So this is one of the two workspaces which we have. Above that, you have some hidden files folders. We have Husky, which we are using to basically enforce like linting of commits. So you cannot commit messages without a specific format, which we are using across the company. Then you also have the GitHub folder, which contains some actions, workflows, the dependabot configuration, and so on. And you can also configure specific actions. So right now we have things such as checking if the app is being built correctly. We can also check if the static application can be built and so on. Then we have the VS Code folder, which for the VS Code users will have some recommended extensions. There are not that many right now, but we've learned a lot of things over the past year, so we will be extending that. Then we've talked about the apps folder. We have some documentation. This is constantly being improved because there are now a lot of things which are quite, or I would not say they are quite complex, but they may not be immediately obvious as to how they are being used. And this is specifically for the page hierarchy. This is the feature that we've been focusing a lot on. And it basically allows you to structure the pages in a tree. So you will specify a parent relation and you don't need to update the full path of all the pages. So for example, right now you have a root page. So this is a node from which all other pages will need to be structured. So maybe if you want to give a showcase of how it works, we could try a demo for it. So if you go ahead and create another page in the same collection, you are in the content type builder.
Hold on a second. I'm broken brain. So page in the
you can
content
create
manager,
any
create a
page
new
you want.
page.
Let's say,
I'm very original.
Go ahead and give it a slack. Let's say another page, but without any slashes. It should be just the slack of the current level. And you can select a parent and you should configure it to the root homepage because this is basically a first level page below the root. So now if you publish this, you should be able to see a new entry in the internal job collection, which is called recalculate full path, and it will also give you the details. And if you navigate back, there is going to be a recalculate all full paths collection button on the right hand side. Now go to the list view and on the top buttons. Yeah. So now you can click that
Right here,
button.
nice.
Now you will need to confirm this. And if you go back to the page collection, you should now see that the full path has been automatically generated for the page. This is the home page, the other one.
Let's go to
And you can see that the full path has been automatically composed from the slack and basically any slack from the previous parents. So now if you were to create another page, which should be a child of this page, it would also get composed. And then if you change any slack in the middle, any children changes will be propagated so that you don't need to worry about if you have like an about us page, which has multiple children, let's say about us contact, about us, a specific location of the company. You would not need to update all of them manually, but you can do this with the internal jobs. Now, you will need to refresh this since you were too fast. Yeah, that's a small limitation.
Makes sense.
And now this is basically like the top level, but it will calculate the full paths recursively. So once again, if you click this, now you should be able to navigate to the page collection and you should see that all of the full paths have been generated.
Yeah, that's super cool. And then this is built like via plugin, right?
This is not a plugin.
Obviously.
This is a combination of life cycles and the DB query builder. So there is some SQL that we need to do because you don't get the reference to the current version of the relations in the life cycles. So there is a little bit of magic, but this way you don't need to worry about updating all of the references. So now if you were to change the slack of the another page, which is the first level below the root, and you recalculate the full paths, it's going to recalculate it for this page and also for any child pages. Internal job, refresh, recalculate full paths. This is also going to
awesome.
create additional jobs, which are basically a create redirect. So you can also click the second button and it's going to propagate these redirects to the redirect collection. So if you already had some like structure, you want to be able to redirect the users to the new page without having on the site. So if it's a new page, it's not going to get redirects because there is nothing to redirect to. But if it was an existing page and you were changing the structure, you will get redirects automatically.
That's so cool. Yeah, the fact that this is done automatically, that's really cool. And yeah, that's also amazing that Strapi, gives you some hooks that you're able to do to add this functionality and not having to be a plugin. That's pretty interesting. Let me ask a question from the custom things that you've been working on and building plugins. Are there things in Strapi that you still find could be improved in a sense, and like some feedback you think is going to be helpful? And the reason I bring it up, some people are like, oh my God, you talk about like things Strapi doesn't do well. Like, news for folks, there's no software that does everything well, but I do want to like collect some feedback and then just kind of like see like from building this template and some of the things that you've been building before, like plugins and the customizations, are there things that you think we could improve on?
Yeah, I would say that with the arrival of V5, the life cycles have been maybe not as clear as it was intended to, because previously in V4 there were some specifics which you needed to follow, but they would generally be documented. But right now with the V5 and with the content history, the way you use life cycles has changed basically completely, because now if you publish a new version of the page or whatever entry it is you are making adjustments to, it will also call the create lifecycle. And this is something which may not be obvious, and you may be getting some behaviors which you may not expect because it's not straightforward. So I would say that the things that we've learned is not to trust the lifecycle so much. And also, we've been having some issues with the relations and working with relations in the life cycles. And while I understand the technical reasons for why they are as they are, for example, if you are making an adjustment and you are not changing the relation, then it will not be present in the life cycle. But it's something you may expect to be there, and that will give you some issues. And also, if you call the life cycle, or let's say, if you make a call to the API from the admin panel and the API, so if you are sending some custom data, the payload of the lifecycle is going to be completely different. And I would say that this is also not obvious, but I understand the reasons for why it is as it is. So I would say that life cycles are basically like a black box for many people. And I know that also in the GitHub issues, there have been some people mentioning that. So I would say, and you were asking about improvements. I'm not sure how you could improve this, because I think that this comes as a result of various change like decisions such as connects and so on. So I'm not necessarily saying it's bad, but I'm saying that it may not be obvious for people who are just starting out with Strapi.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the catch-22 with Strapi. It's easy to get started, but as you start building more custom application with more custom needs, there is this kind of like thing of like you having experience with Strapi as a developer, also like understanding the core internal pieces of Strapi. That's why it's kind of important to look at the core code of Strapi. It's open source, so everybody could see it. And then also there's some APIs that are not well documented by the Strapi team. And it's something that most users are never going to like experience unless you're building very like specific and very custom applications. And so that is like a struggle that we have. And I think it's trying to balance our documentation to where it's beginner friendly, but at the same time, let our users know that there's all these external APIs that we're using that we're not documenting as well as we should. And I think that's a valid call out, by the way. And I'm going to pass it to our engineering and document team, be like, hey, like, it's like we need to at least do a call out. Hey, this is how this operates under these conditions. So that way it's not something you learn through trial and error, but you just see it in the docs. And so let me jump back to the project.
Yeah, but while you are doing that, I don't think that you can have too extensive documentation. I think you can include all of the things, you can just slide it under some advanced tab, and then you can just have it there living quietly. And if you need it, you will know where to find it. But if you are a beginner, you may not ever reach that stage. So I would say that adding more documentation cannot be a bad thing.
Will never hurt. So this is a perfect segue. So I don't know how much AI tools I use. One of the things I started to do is I would have like a docs folder, and then I would have Claude kind of like document different parts of my code. Not only for like Claude to have reference of what the things I use, but also to have documents for me to be like, this, what the hell did you did like 6 weeks ago? And now I like, if I don't remember exactly, I could look at the documentation. I guess my question is, do you like use AI and tools? And B, do you find any use creating like docs via like markdown files in your project to give context to the AI to help you be better at helping you work with your application?
I think that generally in Notum, there is not a strict guideline on which AI you should use or whether you should use it at all. So basically, everybody has been coming up with their workflow and whatever they're comfortable with. But for the second question, I would say definitely, and this is one of the things which I wanted to do for the longest time, and it came to be over the past few months that we were starting to expand the knowledge base within the company. And as you were saying, yes, we've been building it with Markdown, and I was also trying to integrate it with the AI tools, which I was specifically using. And while it's in the early stages, I would say it was quite great. It was able to do things specific for the template without me needing to specify. So it was really great. And also with the arrival of the skills for the agents, I would say it was really great. It's not at the point where we could publish this for the general public, but been experimenting with it internally and it looked very promising. So I'm very keen to finish this and share it with anyone. But firstly, there is some more work that needs to be done.
Yeah. And I think to your point, I think like AI tooling and workflows, they're still like the wild, wild west. And that's exactly kind of experience we had at Strapi is that there is no specific workflow that one developer uses where we use across the whole team. It's literally what you said. Every individual has their own way of doing things that works for them. And I feel like that's kind of like my tip would be to folks who are wanted to experience with tools, do the way it makes sense for you that allows you to be productive and get more done. Don't try to dive into like these Twitter folks that like, I have a workflow for you that's gonna, it's, no, it's because they're all like specific to your use case and what you're used to. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And so I guess we could just like go quickly and go through the rest of the project really quickly, just so folks have a little bit of context when they try out this startup, which I think everybody should. So we have the docs folder. Obviously, we have our pictures. We have
Yeah,
here.
that is folder which is going to include your playwright tests. We are also planning to have the accessibility testing, the end-to-end testing. Once again, these are things we've been trying to come up with as we go. There are many considerations we are taking, and while we have them finished for specific projects, we are not yet comfortable saying it would be great for the general public, so that's why they may not be as advanced within this template as they may be in the project. But that's also something we've been trying to come up with as to like how to structure all of this so that it's beneficial for everyone in a way where they may not see it as something which they always remove from the project because it's just taking up space. So this is something we've been considering. And then for the rest of the repository, we also have some scripts in here. So this will generally be a developer experience improving scripts, such as scripts which remove all of the modules. So that would be your dependencies. Or you can also remove like all of the build cache for all of the applications so that if you feel like you are getting some stale cache being shown, you can use these scripts in your command line to remove all of this and start basically anew without any cache or the node modules. And then I think the last folder is the package folder, which is a little bit higher. Yeah, the packages. So this will contain the shared packages for all of the applications. So things such as the design system where you could hold your Figma configuration. We have basically Tailwind theme, which is included in here so that it can be reused in both of the applications. Then you will have the Slint configuration, TypeScript, Prettier configuration, and basically any of the tools which we are using, you may want to use as well. And then the share data package, which, as I referenced multiple times, will contain the data which you may want to share across all of the applications. So one example would be the list of locales which you want to support in all of your applications. You could store it in there, and then you could have matched the locales of your front end. And if you ever need to add one or remove one, you don't need to worry about having it out of sync. It will always be the same way for all of the applications.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm assuming like Strapi types is the
Yeah. This one is new.
shared types.
I would say it's a week old, so we are testing it out.
Nice. Talked about a lot of stuff. The one thing that I want to just say, the last thing, I don't want to like hold you guys too long, but I know a lot of Strapi users when they start out, a lot of the population and filtering like is confusing. And like one of the recommendation has been, pre-populating stuff from your Strapi application where it makes sense. Is that something that you're doing in this template?
That is a complex topic. And in the early stages of the template, we were using the forbidden populate deep plugin, which I know many people in Strapi are a fan of, but it was causing us a lot of issues with performance, so we decided to ditch it. And the next best thing for us was, so we are very specific about what we want this template to do. And above everything else, while we have multiple features in the template, the primary thing that we want to do is the page builder experience. And that means that we know that we have a page with a specific dynamic zone, and we know that there are X, Y, and Z components. So what we've been utilizing in V5 is the document middleware, where we are checking if it's find one or find many or find first endpoint. In that case, we have a specific condition that needs to be met. So if it's a pagination of page one and page size one, so that it's just a single page population, we are not using it to populate like a list of pages, which would be troublesome. And if these conditions are met, then we have an object in the Strapi repository, which is basically the populate object for all of the specific components. And then once we populating a page, we just compose basically these small populate objects into one, and then we swap that for whatever the user was sending in the first place. So if you want something populated, let's say specifically the page, you will need to keep the populate object up to date in Strapi, but it takes all of the guesswork out of the front-end application.
So as an example, let me share my screen. And so the populate
Yes.
logic lives in the Strapi project.
Yeah, it lives in the document middleware folder. Yep.
The
And
document
as you can
middleware.
see, we have one for the page collection right now. There is some configuration. So as I was saying, well, I was wrong apparently. So we are only doing it for the find many. And this is where you can change if you want to populate the pages, or maybe you will have multiple collections. You may have a block collection, which you want to populate the same way. So you would be free to add that. And then it's basically a middleware. So it's doing a check whether it's the specific collection. It's doing a check whether it's the specific action of the request. And then we also have one more check. It's the middleware populate. So it's an additional query parameter, which you would be sending from Strapi. And so if you send the name of the dynamic zone in the request, this is where you would see this middleware being applied. So basically, we are very specifically saying that, hey, if this is a page collection request and it's a GET request, and there is only one page being fetched, and it contains the middleware populate, replace whatever the populate object they are sending with the one which is at the bottom of this file. So if you scroll down a little bit, you will see that this is where we keep the populate object for the pages.
Yes. And the benefit of this, I think like for some people that might be like, oh, this is too complex. Like the issue is like, you would have to do this on your front end regardless. And so this way, instead, you're keeping your front end lean and you're handling all the like logic here in Strapi on the server. And I think what's awesome about this is that you could predefine and create like different checks where someone can't get data that they are not allowed or don't have access to, because you literally define what the end populate query object should look like.
An additional issue you may get if you are doing this from the front end. So if you have a lot of components, and trust us, we know we've been having projects with hundreds of components. So once you get to a certain level, the populate object is going to be so big that it will not fit in a URL. So you will be getting some of the populate object cut off and you will not be able to populate it anyway. So if you have a lot of components, you will need to do it. Well, maybe not this specific way, but you would need to do it another way than from the front end.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I think I think this is like a cool like stopping point. The last thing I wanted to do is just do some final thoughts and finishing items. And so for me, I would say if you've never checked out Nodum, check them out. You know, your number one agency for all things Strapi. To me, that's 100% fact. The amount of work you do with Strapi and how amazing you've been, not just like in your own community, helping through meetups, and also how much you helped with Strapi. I think that's amazing. So if anybody needs a project that you're like, I don't want to build this myself, or you're not a developer, you're a company owner, and you're like, I need to build specific things, definitely check out Nodum. They're the most amazing team, and I 100% recommend. And if you are a developer and you're like, you know what, I'm going to build a thing myself, I don't really care. Well, Nodum still got you covered, right? That's why we talked about the Next.js Strapi starter, because literally you're saving yourself 3 to 4, in some cases 6 weeks of work trying to get started, because you don't have to think through those initial things that from the start, and they already made the mistakes for you, right? They created the template based off their sweat, tears, probably like lots of crying to make their jobs easier. And I just want to say thank you for also making it open source and public for folks to be able to use this template to get started with. I know Jiri here, not on camera, but shout out to him. By the way, I called Dominic Jiri because I quickly read the screen name, which I apologize. Oh my God, you know, serves me right. And then definitely check out the template. I'll share the repo in the description of this video. Very simple and straightforward to get started. And you can also, you know, bug with questions if you want, as much as you want. I'm sure, you know, they will appreciate it, and definitely check it out, which is pretty cool. And the last thing I was going to say, Nodum team is just amazing because you always find ways to start trouble at Strapi. And one great example of it, last time we had Strapi Conf, you decided to make a 10-question quiz. And the reason why I say starting trouble is because A, you showed the names and the score of what people got. So it's very publicly calling people out on their Strapi knowledge. And that didn't help the Strapi team, because you're like, you know what? We're going to get as many people to take it so we could make fun of them if they don't score the right score. So I think that was a very fun thing that you did at Strapi Conf, and we still give people problems. And I was just excited I somehow was able to not be on that lower tier of the list. So it's great.
Yeah, that was a lot of kind words. So thank you, Paul. And yeah, for people who are watching this, we are always trying to improve the template and have it give you as much like zero issue implementation of any project, as Paul said, whether it's a mom and pop or if it's an enterprise company. So feel free to check it out. Give us some comments in the issues if you find anything. We are always trying to improve it. So any feedback is appreciated. We've been trying to get people talking to us about it all the time. So we appreciate anything.
That's awesome. And thank you for being Dominic and Jiri off screen. And I'm hoping to do more cool chats with you in the future like this. And thanks a lot for coming.
Yeah. Thank you as well. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone.